The sound of splintering wood woke me before sunrise. At first, I thought I was dreaming, maybe thunder rolling through Oak Haven meadows. But then I heard her scream. Clover, my therapy horse, my companion, my heart. I tore the curtains back and saw it, the bulldozer's steel jaws already tearing into the side of the stable I'd built with my bare hands. A yellow machine eating through timber like it was cardboard. And standing there, phone held high like some deranged director filming a demolition scene, was Agnes Pringle. The same woman who once filed a complaint about a garden gnome being visually disruptive. That's when I knew. This wasn't about bylaws anymore. This wasn't HOA drama. This was a targeted attack against a 700-pound heart that healed disabled kids every week, and I only had seconds to stop it. But if you think this story is just about a horse barn and a bitter old woman with too much power, think again. What we uncovered that day led to arrest, federal investigations, and the end of one of the most twisted HOA reigns you've ever heard of. So let me take you back to where it all began, to a little horse named Clover and a neighborhood where beauty covered up something rotten underneath the roses. This is the story of how one community nearly lost its soul, and how one horse helped us find it again. Would you like me to continue writing part 1? Welcome to Oak Haven Meadows, where perfection becomes a prison in the same tone and structure. Welcome to Oak Haven Meadows, where perfection becomes a prison. They say perfection is peaceful. Quiet lawns, silent sprinklers, fresh mulch in straight lines. And for a while, I believed that. I moved to Oak Haven Meadows because I thought I needed silence. After decades as a pediatric occupational therapist, I was ready for a slower pace. A place where birdsong replaced hospital alarms. Somewhere I could tend my roses, sip chamomile on my porch, and spend my golden years with someone who gave me purpose. That someone turned out to be Clover, a lineage therapy horse, 28 inches tall, soft gray like a morning fog, eyes so gentle they could melt concrete. She wasn't just a pet. She was healing. For me. For the kids I still worked with, informally. Lily with her cerebral palsy, Sam with a wall of silence so tall you'd think it had no door. Clover opened doors. She opened hearts. And Oak Haven? It was supposed to be our sanctuary. But let me tell you something. Perfection has a dark side. It polices garden gnomes. It files noise complaints over wind chimes. It measures your mailbox flag angle and, God forbid, it's a degree too high. That's where Agnes Pringle comes in. Agnes doesn't walk. She patrols. She doesn't wave. She scans. She once told a neighbor their front yard reeked of rebellion because their begonias were orange instead of approved coral blush. I wish I were kidding. She wasn't elected HOA president. She became it, like a fog rolling in under the door. And once she set her sights on my property, on Clover, well, that's when Oak Haven stopped being a peaceful cul-de-sac and started feeling more like a well-manicured prison yard. But hey, before we go further, can I ask you something? If you've ever dealt with an HOA nightmare, or if you've ever seen someone mistake control for community, hit that like button, drop your story in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe. This isn't just a story about one little horse. It's about how far people will go to defend what matters, and how sometimes kindness can kick back. Because what happened next? It wasn't just a fight over a stable. It was a fight for sanity, for compassion, for the soul of a neighborhood. And it all started the day the smell complaint showed up in my mailbox. The little horse that healed, Clover's quiet revolution. It's funny how something so small can change so much. Clover wasn't just a miniature horse. She was a movement on 4 hooves. The kids called her the Whisper Pony. That's because she didn't need to whinny to get through. She just stood there, solid, gentle, breathing. And somehow, that was enough to help a 7-year-old girl with leg braces walk a little taller. or convince a 10-year-old boy who barely spoke to open up about his favorite cartoons while brushing her mane. My backyard became more than a garden. It became a sanctuary. Not just for me, but for children who had known way too much struggle for their young age. There was Lily, who would smile for hours after each visit. Sam, who once told Clover a secret, and I swear, that pony leaned in like she understood every word. There was Ethan, too, who came in afraid of animals and left with a fistful of hay and a laugh that cracked through months of silence. I kept the stable clean. I kept the noise down. Heck, I even planted lavender to sweeten the air. And every permit? Signed, sealed, and stamped by the town before Agnes ever knew the stable existed. But to Agnes, Clover wasn't a healer. She was an eyesore with hoofs. It started small. Of course it did. First, it was a complaint about the smell. Not manure. Mind you, Clover's stable smelled better than most garages. Then came the letter about visual disruption. Apparently, a charming storybook shed, built with love, was too rustic for her tastes. And when the board didn't agree with her, she started getting creative. She quoted bylaws that didn't apply, misinterpreted zoning regulations, claimed the presence of unregulated livestock. Once she even said Clover was attracting pests. No evidence, just that classic Agnes look, like she'd smelled something sour and decided you were the source. But I didn't give in, because for every snide remark she whispered at HOA meetings, there was a parent telling me their child had slept through the night for the first time in weeks. For every letter typed in bold and signed with her aggressive loop of a signature, there was a kid gently placing a flower behind Clover's ear and calling her best friend. And somewhere along the way, Clover wasn't just my horse anymore. She became theirs. And that scared Agnes more than any smell or shed or insect vector ever could. Because power built on fear can't stand up to something that's truly loved. But of course, Agnes wasn't done. Oh no. She was just getting warmed up. Agnes Pringle, when HOA becomes a crusade. I used to think HOA just meant some rules about grass height and mailbox paint. Then I met Agnes Pringle. Let me paint you a picture. Imagine if a measuring tape became a person, then gave it a clipboard, a scowl that could curdle milk, and the moral certainty of a medieval inquisitor. And you've got Agnes. Her front yard was terrifying, not in the horror movie sense, but in the everything is so perfect something's definitely wrong here sense. The grass looked vacuumed, the hedges, perfect cubes. I once watched a leaf fall onto her lawn, and I swear she emerged from behind a bush within seconds, holding pruning shears like a weapon. And she had one goal: eliminate what she called unsanctioned elements. Spoiler alert, Clover and I were elements 1 and 2. It started with letters, stamped with the HOA logo, written in fonts so formal they looked like they came straight from the Queen of England's office. Each one signed with a flourish so aggressive it should have come with a warning label. They came weekly, then twice a week. Odor violations, unauthorized animal structures, alleged insect generation, which I still don't understand. Clover wasn't breeding mosquitoes in the hay, Agnes. She even claimed my therapy horse was a public health risk. But here's the thing, Agnes didn't just enforce the rules. She interpreted them. And not in a fair, let's be reasonable kind of way. No. Agnes wielded those bylaws like scripture. And in her mind, she wasn't just a board member. She was the savior of Oakhaven Meadows. A one-woman crusade to root out anything heartfelt, spontaneous, or, God forbid, she tried painting Clover as some kind of livestock apocalypse. You'd think the little mare was summoning swarms of flies and plagues of mildew, the way Agnes talked. But here's the wild part. When people pushed back, when board members, finally, started saying maybe a tiny horse helping disabled children isn't the end of civilization, Agnes didn't slow down. She doubled down. She started talking about cleansing the landscape, about removing non-compliant anomalies. One time, I overheard her mutter to another board member, "Sometimes, for true order to be restored, you need to prune the rot." That's when I stopped laughing, because it wasn't about rules anymore. It was personal, and it wasn't about property values. It was about control. Agnes wasn't fighting against a horse, she was fighting against the idea that something could be beautiful, valuable, and healing, and not approved by her. And when she realized she couldn't win through letters or meetings or eye rolls so sharp they could cut glass, she started planning something else. Something worse, the day of the bulldozer, when obsession turns criminal. You ever hear a sound so out of place it stops your heart? For me, it was diesel. Not a truck down the road, not a mower. No, this was low, angry, industrial. A 7-year-old's a bulldozer. At 5:47 a.m., I shot out of bed, heart thudding, threw open the curtains. And I swear for half a second I thought I was dreaming. There it was. A skid, steer loader. Big bucket lowered like a battering ram, crawling toward Clover's little stable. And standing next to it, her hair sprayed into full battle helmet mode, was Agnes Pringle, phone in hand, smiling. My first thought, she wouldn't. My second, oh God, she would. I flew down the stairs, didn't even grab my robe. I ran barefoot across the yard, screaming, "Stop! Stop! There's an animal in there!" I could see Clover's stable shaking as the thing rolled closer, rattling the ground like a mini earthquake. My sweet girl was still inside, probably curled up in her straw bed, dreaming peaceful pony dreams. And Agnes was live streaming her demolition. I screamed again, but Agnes didn't even flinch. She glanced at me once, like I was a leaf on her perfect lawn. Then she turned back to the camera and said, "We're experiencing minor resistance from those who confuse sentiment with sanitation." I was begging, crying, running full speed. But she didn't care. Because Agnes didn't see Clover as a living thing. She saw clutter, she saw defiance. And right then, her bulldozer guy, this giant grim-looking man, hit the gas. And I heard the wood crack. Not creak, like bone. I screamed, "Clover!" and that's when her whinny cut through the noise. High, sharp, panicked. The kind of sound you don't forget even if you want to. I was 10 feet from the door when the stable wall buckled inward. And then, another voice, deep, commanding. "Stop that machine. Police, stop it now." It wasn't mine. It was Commissioner Marcus Thorne, my quiet neighbor 2 houses down. Normally the man wouldn't say 2 words at a cookout. But that morning he walked straight across the lawn like a tank in a suit, eyes locked on the bulldozer operator, voice booming like a fire alarm. And the machine froze. Agnes turned. Her face, normally locked in judgment mode, twitched. Just for a second, because she realized this wasn't her HOA court. This was real law now. Marcus didn't say much. He didn't have to. He got me to Clover. Thank God she was shaken but okay. And then he turned and said in the calmest voice I've ever heard, "Agnes Pringle, what on earth do you think you're doing?" And let me tell you, friends, that was the moment her reign began to crumble. The man who ran toward the fire, Marcus Thorne, and the cost of silence. I always knew Marcus Thorne was the quiet type, the kind of man who says good morning like he's signing a legal document, the kind of neighbor who waves once and means it for the entire week. And I figured with a state police badge and a resume that could give anyone a complex, maybe quiet was just part of the job. But that morning, when Clover's stable was crumbling and Agnes was smiling into her phone like it was the best HOA drama she'd ever broadcast, Marcus ran. Not walked, not called. He ran. Straight across the lawn, suit pants flapping, coffee left cooling on his counter. And when he yelled, "Stop that machine, police!" the world paused. Even the bulldozer hesitated. That's power. But the thing about Marcus? He didn't do it to be powerful. He did it because he couldn't stay silent anymore. See, what most folks didn't know, and what Marcus later admitted in that steady, low voice of his, was that he'd been watching Agnes for a long time, watching her weaponize bylaws, watching her nitpick people until they cried, watching her pick on Mrs. Carter not because she broke rules, but because she broke Agnes's idea of control. He told me later that morning, once the sirens quieted and Clover was safe. I thought not getting involved was the respectful thing. I thought silence meant neutrality, but it doesn't. Silence in a place like this is permission. That stuck with me, still does. Because Marcus had power, real power, and he waited, hoping reason would win out, hoping someone else would stop her, hoping it wouldn't come to this. But that morning, when he heard Mrs. Carter scream, he realized silence had cost too much already. It had almost cost Clover her life. And here's the wildest part. Marcus didn't just stop the bulldozer. He kept going. He was the one who ordered Agnes detained. He was the one who called in the arson unit. He was the one who spotted the red gas cans in the truck and said, "This isn't just vandalism. This might be something worse." Because while Agnes thought she was waging an aesthetic war about smells and sheds and unsightly structures, Marcus saw what it really was. A crusade. And those never end well. And in that moment, with Clover shivering under a blanket and Mrs. Carter clinging to her like a lifeline, Marcus Thorne stopped being the quiet neighbor and became the one man in Oak Haven who finally said, "Enough." What they found in the truck changed everything. When Sparky, the arson dog, barked, I thought maybe it was just nerves. I mean, the stable was already half destroyed, the air smelled like wood dust and diesel, and we were all still shaking. Before clinging off, but then he barked again. Sharper this time. Not just at the barn, at the truck. Dirk Olson's work truck, beat up, muddy tires, backseat full of fast food wrappers and chain grease, parked just past the Carter property line like it didn't have secrets. Except it did. And Sparky knew. The officers moved fast. They popped the passenger door, peeled back a tarp, and everyone stopped breathing. There they were. 2 bright red plastic gas cans, full, and 2 heavy-duty black contractor bags that didn't jingle like tools or clank like scrap. They thudded, and whatever was inside them, it wasn't for cleanup. Dirk, the poor guy, turned sheet white. "I thought it was fertilizer," he said, voice trembling. "She said it was for soil remediation." "Did it smell like fertilizer?" an officer asked. "No," he whispered. "Smelled sharp. Like diesel and cleaning fluid." That's when the tech team pulled out the equipment. Gloves on, scanners humming. And when they sliced open those bags, ANFO, ammonium nitrate and fuel oil, the same chemical cocktail that blew up entire buildings in Oklahoma in '95. Enough in those bags to not just flatten Clover's stable, but take out the back half of the Carter house, maybe the neighbors too. It wasn't just petty revenge. It wasn't just HOA madness anymore. It was almost terrorism. All because of a therapy horse. All because Clover smelled like hay and gave disabled kids something to smile about. I looked over at Mrs. Carter then, knees still dirty from the lawn, hand resting gently on Clover's muzzle, and I swear, for a second she looked 50 years older. Worn down by something even years of grief hadn't managed to do. And Agnes? Still sitting in the back of that squad car, staring forward like she couldn't figure out what went wrong. Like she'd thought she was the victim. And here's the kicker. This whole thing? It wasn't even her idea of a crime. It was her idea of cleaning up Clover's corner, when justice builds, not destroys. I didn't expect the courtroom to be full, but it was. Every pew packed, neighbors, reporters, a few stone-faced HOA board members who'd kept their distance during the worst of it. Even Lily and Sam's families were there, sitting quietly near the back, holding hands. And at the front of it all, Agnes Pringle. Gray suit, lips pursed, hands folded just so, like she was at a country club brunch instead of a felony sentencing. But no amount of hairspray or clipped vowels could stop the truth. The footage was played. The gas cans were displayed. And the jury didn't take long. Guilty. On all accounts that mattered. Aggravated animal cruelty. Malicious destruction of property. Conspiracy to commit arson. Reckless endangerment. The explosives charge stayed sealed, held like a thundercloud. But the sentence came hard and fast. No parole. Years in state prison. Years where she'd have time to reflect in a space with far less symmetry than her precious lawn. But what happened after was what no one expected. See, Mrs. Carter never wanted revenge. She didn't want Agnes locked up to feel better. She wanted something to grow. And with a settlement reached and Agnes's assets legally seized, it did. A portion of her fortune, ironically earned through real estate, was ordered by the judge to be turned into something permanent. Something good. Something that couldn't be bulldozed. That's how Clover's Corner was born. An equine therapy center, built on county land. Fully accessible, state-of-the-art, open to every child in the area who needed hope, balance, or just one day of peace. And standing proudly in the first paddock, Clover, healed, stronger, wearing a purple halter with her name stitched in gold thread. I remember the grand opening. Mrs. Carter wore a pale blue scarf and sunglasses too big for her face, trying not to cry as kids streamed in. Sam brought a box of homemade cookies. Lily walked 4 steps without her crutches. And Marcus Thorne? He stood near the gate, hand resting gently on Clover's neck, whispering something no one else heard. It was more than a building. It was a promise. That no voice, no matter how cruel, how loud, or how manicured, could drown out kindness forever. The last fence fell, a community redefined by kindness. They tore down the old HOA welcome sign last spring, not in protest, not in anger, just quietly, like closing a book that didn't deserve to stay open. The metal frame creaked as the bolts came out, and I'll never forget the sound it made when it hit the grass. Not a crash, not a clang, more like a long exhale. We left the space empty for a week. And then the kids, the very ones Agnes had tried to erase. They filled it with wildflowers. A little handmade sign went up beside them, written in crooked 4th-grade handwriting. Welcome to Oakhaven. Clover lives here. That's when I realized the last fence had fallen. Not the white picket kind. The invisible ones. The ones that told us how tall a mailbox should be. The ones that whispered who belonged and who didn't. The ones that made kindness a liability. They were gone. People started talking more. We started helping each other, not with HOA violations, but real things. Fixing porch steps, walking each other's dogs, watching over each other's kids. Mrs. Carter? She got her garden back. The roses bloomed bigger this year. Clover? Well, she's a bit of a celebrity now. She's been featured in 2 local news segments and 1 national magazine spread with the headline, "The Horse Who Survived a Bulldozer and Built a Sanctuary Instead." But she doesn't care about headlines. She cares about braids in her mane and carrot slices in tiny hands. And me? I'm just one voice in a story much bigger than me. But I can tell you this. The greatest kind of justice isn't just punishment. It's transformation. It's what happens when a woman with a clipboard and too much power meets a horse with no voice and loses. It's what happens when a quiet act of compassion, a therapy session in a backyard, outshines a dozen fake bylaws and weaponized complaints. It's what happens when people finally choose to stand on the side of kindness. So if you're watching this, and you've got a Karen in your life, the kind that hides cruelty behind standards, remember this. Every fence they build can fall. Every life they try to shrink can bloom. And every small voice, when brave enough, can change a neighborhood. Sometimes, all it takes is a miniature horse, a very angry woman, and the people who decide to show up anyway. If this story moved you even a little, drop a comment, hit like, and subscribe. Because sometimes the world doesn't need another hero. It just needs someone to stand in the way of a bulldozer and say, "Not today."